The wind that night sounded like a roaring freight train tearing through the neighborhood. Snow blasted across the streets so thick that you could barely see the houses across the road. The weather forecast had warned everyone about the incoming winter storm, but no one expected it to be this bad. Temperatures had dropped far below freezing, and the entire neighborhood looked completely deserted. Most people had already rushed inside hours earlier, stocking up on blankets and hot drinks while waiting for the storm to pass. But I was in my favorite spot in the house, my heated garage. The warm air hummed softly from the overhead heater while I worked on my truck. Tools were spread across my workbench, and the smell of motor oil filled the air. I had the radio playing quietly in the background, where the weather station kept repeating the same warning: stay indoors and avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. Outside, the wind rattled the garage door as snow piled higher by the minute. Honestly, I was perfectly comfortable. The garage was warm, the storm couldn't reach me, and I had plenty of time to finish fixing my truck. That's when the pounding started. Bang, bang, bang. The sudden noise echoed through the garage so loudly that it made me jump. For a second, I thought maybe something had blown into the door during the storm. Then it happened again. Bang, bang, bang. Someone was knocking. Hard. Confused, I walked over to the side door and opened it carefully. A blast of freezing wind rushed inside immediately, along with swirling snow. And standing there on my driveway, wrapped in a thick coat and covered in snow from head to toe, was the last person I expected to see during a storm like this. Karen, our neighborhood HOA president, and judging by the angry look already on her face, she hadn't come over for a friendly visit the moment the door opened. She stepped closer to the entrance as if she had every right to walk straight inside. Snowflakes clung to her coat, and the freezing wind pushed against us from behind, but that didn't stop her from speaking in the same demanding tone everyone in the neighborhood knew too well. "You need to open this garage right now," she said sharply. I blinked, confused by the order. "Excuse me, my car heater stopped working," she continued, clearly annoyed. "And I'm not going to sit in a freezing vehicle while you're standing here in a warm garage." I looked past her toward the street. The snowstorm was still raging, and visibility was terrible. It was definitely not a night anyone wanted to be outside. But that didn't mean Karen could just claim someone else's property. "Karen," I said calmly, "this is my garage." She rolled her eyes like I had just said something ridiculous. "Don't start that again," she replied. "This neighborhood operates under HOA regulations. Community spaces should be available during emergencies." I almost laughed. This garage had been built with my house years ago. I paid for the electricity, the heater, and every repair inside it. There was nothing, community-owned, about it. Still, Karen acted like she was completely certain she was right. Before I could say anything else, she stepped forward again and reached toward the door. "I'm coming in," she said. "It's freezing out here." I quickly moved to block the entrance. "No, you're not." Karen stopped in her tracks, clearly shocked that someone had just told her no. Her expression hardened instantly. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped. "I'm the HOA president. That doesn't give you permission to enter my property." She crossed her arms, her voice growing even more irritated. "People like you never understand how these communities work. The HOA exists to maintain order and protect property values." The irony was unbelievable. For years Karen had used that same excuse to fine neighbors for the smallest things: trash cans left out too long, lawns a little too tall, even kids leaving bicycles in their own yards. Now suddenly she wanted help from the same neighbors she constantly threatened. And somehow, she still expected me to just step aside. Karen stood there with her arms crossed, clearly expecting me to give in eventually. The storm outside continued to rage, wind howling through the street and snow piling up along the driveway. But Karen didn't look like she was planning to leave anytime soon. Instead, she lifted her chin and spoke with complete confidence. "If you don't open this garage, she said, "I'll be filing an official HOA complaint tomorrow morning." I leaned against the doorframe, completely unimpressed. "Really?" I asked calmly. "And what exactly would the complaint say?" Karen didn't hesitate for a second. "Refusing to assist a member of the community during an emergency," she replied. "That kind of behavior violates the spirit of HOA regulations." I almost laughed. That wasn't even a real rule, but Karen had always been good at twisting words to make it sound like she had authority over everything in the neighborhood. She continued talking, clearly convinced she had already won the argument. "I'll also be bringing this up at the next HOA board meeting," she added. "People in this neighborhood need to understand that cooperation matters." I nodded slowly. "That's fine," I said. Karen smirked, thinking I was backing down. But then I added something she didn't expect. "You might want to talk to your landlord before you do that." Her confident expression instantly changed. "My landlord?" she repeated, confused. "Yes," I said. "The house you're renting on Maple Drive." Karen frowned slightly, clearly trying to understand where this conversation was going. "What about it?" I took a small step back and folded my arms. "Well," I said calmly, "you might want to know that the property was sold recently." Karen shrugged. "So, what does that have to do with this?" I smiled slightly. "Everything," I replied, "because 3 weeks earlier, I had quietly purchased several properties in this neighborhood as part of an investment plan. And one of those properties just happened to be the house Karen was renting." She still had absolutely no idea. But she was about to find out. Karen stared at me, trying to figure out whether I was serious. "You're joking," she said after a moment. I simply shook my head. "Nope." For a second, the only sound in the garage was the steady hum of the heater and the storm raging outside. Snow continued to slam against the driveway, but Karen didn't seem to notice anymore. Her mind was clearly focused on one thing. "You're saying, you bought my rental house?" she asked slowly. "That's right," I replied. 3 weeks ago." Karen's confident posture began to fade. Just minutes earlier she had been standing there threatening me with HOA complaints and acting like she controlled the entire neighborhood. Now she looked completely unsure. "That doesn't make any sense," she muttered. "The management company never told me anything. They sent the ownership transfer notice yesterday," I explained calmly. "You'll probably see it in your email." Karen didn't respond immediately. She just stood there thinking, clearly realizing that the situation had changed in a big way. Then her tone softened almost instantly. "Look," she said, brushing some snow off her coat, "maybe we started this conversation a little tense." I raised an eyebrow. "A little tense?" "Well, you know what I mean," she said quickly. "It's just the storm. Everyone's stressed." That was quite a different attitude compared to the one she had 5 minutes earlier. Outside, another strong gust of wind pushed snow across the driveway, making Karen shiver slightly. She glanced back toward the warm garage. "Would it really hurt to let me warm up in here for a few minutes?" she asked quietly. I thought about all the times Karen had fined neighbors over tiny issues. The retired couple she forced to repaint their fence. The family she warned about holiday decorations. The kids she yelled at for leaving bikes on the sidewalk. Now she wanted kindness from the same neighborhood she had spent years controlling. I crossed my arms and looked at her for a moment. "Karen," I said calmly, "you were threatening me with HOA violations not long ago." She looked down at the floor. "Well, that was before I knew you were my landlord." "Exactly." By early morning, the storm had finally passed. The powerful winds that had shaken the neighborhood all night slowly faded away, leaving behind a thick blanket of snow covering every street, driveway, and rooftop. The entire neighborhood looked like it had been buried under a white sheet. I opened the garage door and stepped outside. The air was still freezing, but the sky had cleared, and sunlight reflected off the snow, making everything shine. Slowly, neighbors began stepping outside their homes, bundled up in coats and boots, ready to start shoveling their driveways. It was the usual routine after a big winter storm. But one thing felt different. Karen. The night before, after warming up in the garage for a few minutes, she had quietly thanked me and walked back to her house without another argument. There were no more threats, no more HOA speeches, and no more orders. Just a quiet, thanks, before she left. Over the next few days, something interesting started happening in the neighborhood. People were talking. Apparently, several residents had filed complaints about Karen's behavior with the HOA board. After years of strict rules, surprise fines, and constant arguments with neighbors, many people were finally speaking up. And then the announcement came. Karen was stepping down as HOA president. The board claimed it was her personal decision, but most neighbors had a pretty good idea why it happened. Without the title and authority she once used to control everyone, Karen suddenly became much quieter around the neighborhood. No more shouting about trash cans. No more lectures about lawn height. No more surprise violation notices taped to doors. Then about a week later, Karen received another letter in her mailbox. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from me. Just a polite notice from the new property owner reminding tenants to follow basic community respect guidelines. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening, just simple rules about being respectful and cooperative with neighbors. Funny enough, those were the same values Karen had spent years ignoring. Now whenever she sees me around the neighborhood, she just gives a quick nod and keeps walking. No arguments, no demands, just quiet respect. And every winter when I turn on the heater in my garage, I can't help but remember the night of that storm. The night Karen demanded my garage, only to realize she had been standing in front of her landlord the entire time.